So up next, we have our panel discussion on data analytics strategies in financial services. Thank you. So what I will do is I will call up the name of our panelists as well as their position and their company, and if they could please come to the stage one by one. Starting off with Mr. Abdul Baba, who's the Chief Technology and Information Officer for Infrastructure South Africa. Secondly, I would like to welcome Michelle Shunken, who's the Data and AI Lead for Investec Bank and Wealth and Investment Management. We then have Mr. Daniel Wertheimer, who's the Lead Data Scientist at Absa. One of our speakers from yesterday, CTO at Comparisure, Dr. Franco van Wyk. And most recently, the CFO of Africa Data Center, Mr. Munzari. Lastly, I would like to welcome Callan Abrams, who's the Executive Director of Data-Led Insights.
Thank you, Program Director, and everyone. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon, or almost afternoon. It's about 5 minutes away. Good afternoon again to you. I think we've got a very strong panel with very deep experience from banking to insurance to deep data science, as well as consultants leading the data.
If you click on it, you then get pushed more training, which is quite funny. They're basically tricking you into and seeing what you would do in the case of, like Daniel, you won like 10,000 Rand from Absa, and like you kind of want to click it because you're an Absa employee, and you're like, hey, that's amazing, and then you get pushed training. It's quite funny. So this is the kind of stuff that is happening. They kind of, I guess, gamifying the learning process.
Great, Franco, your side.
Yeah, I think Daniel sort of hit the nail on the head there. Always you've got need the internal tools. Also, we've made a point of doing a monthly sort of system-wide checkup. Even though nothing has changed in the last month, it's always good to just run we've got a bullet point list of actions that we need to check. Does everyone still have their a password on their laptops, or you can't take a CSV file and put it on a USB stick or whatever the case is. Just going through the basics on a monthly basis, and I think that's been working well.
Great. I'd like to bring in the culture side, Callan. Maybe if you can talk a little bit about that. I think there's a culture that is needed in order to ensure that there's awareness around data protection going forward. So I think it's something that it has to come from the top down. It can't be bottom up only. And I think the importance of campaigns of showing you how important data is also required. So maybe just comment on that. Yeah.
There's a few topics that have kind of been floating around here. Very interesting here. You spoke about the data sovereignty. And we had a very interesting project from, not to expose my clients, but we had a very interesting project where we could not continue with the project because the data was not in South Africa. And so the entire project kind of stood still, as much as everything was in place to manipulate and to create this beautiful solution, because the data center did not lie in South Africa and the infrastructure was not in South Africa. Legally, we could not do the project. Crazy stuff. From a data privacy perspective, I want to almost challenge the conversation here and say, we know that it's almost a given that our data is out there, unfortunately, and it's horrible. And, what can we do to minimize the impact? And that's, for me, where I focus with my clients is about, because we need to look at the impact. We love it when the data tells us what's wrong with us,
Exactly.
how to, gives us prescriptions, gives us, recommends us the next movie to watch, recommends us new shoes to buy. We love it when it's that. And those are the everyday things. But sometimes, and honestly, hopefully sometimes it's the other case, I think one of the speakers yesterday said it, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You've built something that is inherently good, and someone is going to take advantage or find a way to manipulate it. And so how do we actually look at that and say, it's going to happen? What if it happens? What are the impacts? What is the worst case scenario? How do we limit it? How do we start closing the impact in terms of how many of the customers it affects, how hard it affects customers, and put in those protocols?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to add, the group CISO from Standard Bank alluded a point last night, and she said that it takes one breach, just one breach, to allow things to change in the organization, and that whatever you have before, you have access to it the next day in terms of resources, budget, and so forth, and that creates a learning change within the organization, and that just shifts to the culture change, and sometimes it's not a good thing, but it has to happen, right? In order for the company to realize that data is an asset and it has to be protected and that going forward. So I think there's a numerous of challenges. We can talk about it, for a while, but I think I'm just trying to touch on the points that was raised last night as key points of some conversations that CISOs are having with the business and what is being kind of at the front. So maybe let's just talk about culture is a big thing, and I think let's just talk about the Sovereignty Act. I think that's important. Maybe for now, that's a big thing, right? If you look at initially in my previous role, I didn't want to move data because I didn't know my data sitting in Ireland and with Microsoft. Business needs to know where the data is. If something happens, we need to go detail of that issue, know exactly who hacked it, and why they've hacked it. And I think that act will also influence in terms of where we store our data. Maybe just a little bit about that to help, with some of the linkages to security as well. But just the idea for everyone to understand.
Sure. I think what we're seeing, and we're seeing this in South Africa and elsewhere on the continent, there is this move from, I put it in context, right? We're probably talking continental Africa, probably 15 to 20% of the global population. We've got 1% of the data center capacity. So that tells you that a lot of the data is sitting elsewhere, right? So that's kind of the starting point. And what we're seeing is, and interestingly, it's two-way, but what we're seeing is the local governments are starting to say, if data for our citizens must be stored in country. There's a lot of pressure on financial service institutions to make sure that's being done. There's a lot of pressure in general in terms of, if you're going to be using our citizens' data, there should at least be a copy, in country. So I think the act around that, this is what it's trying to achieve. And there are various acts in various countries that are trying to do the same thing. One thing that I think, I think that the question that's out there is really, does every single country have their own data in country, and do we have to have a data center in every single country? Because kind of technology-wise, we can probably have a big data center in South Africa that services Namibia quite effectively. There's no latency there. I mean, you used to pull the data from Ireland anyway. You can pull it from Namibia. So so there's a lot of I think the questions that are out there. How do you craft that so it's actually also efficient? Because there's some smaller countries that probably don't need to have a big hyperscaler data center or have Amazon set up a data center in as they've done here in South Africa. And do you then get left behind because some of the hyperscalers will say, well, I'm not going to build a data center everywhere. I'm going to pick where I'm going to build. So I think these are the questions that are out there that are important to answer. Something that's quite interesting that's come up lately is actually with the high energy costs globally and everything that's happening there, we're actually seeing quite a lot of pressure from European lobbyists to say data centers use a lot of power. Power is really expensive. Why do we have South African data sitting here and using all our power? That should move back to Africa. So we're also seeing that, which was an interesting trend, at least for me. So we're seeing it. All indications of the data will be housed locally, at least on the continent. The question I think that's out there is really how do you optimize that and make sure that we take advantage of advances in technology, so you don't actually have to have a big data center in every single country, which will really result in some countries just not having some of the big cloud providers and others having them.
Yeah. Just a question while we're talking about it. How do you advise CIOs or IT managers where to start? Normally, you look at the organization, what data they need, and then align to that. A lot of big things that some companies are overexposed, invested. So how do you, just a quick way just to, for someone just to say, okay, where do you start? Look at the company, look at what they want to achieve, what data they're reporting, and then allocate, a scenario or plan for that based on, the challenges that we have, because obviously that just does, provide just a quick one.
Where is my data? So you want to know where it is.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the starting point. Once you know where it is, I think you want to know how you can access it and how easy you can do that. And of course, to your point, then what are my actual needs in terms of workloads? What kind of accessibility do I need? And what's the best way to achieve that? There is no sort of silver bullet. As you mentioned, some organizations choose 100% cloud. We're seeing other organizations to go 50-50 and say, listen, we'll put our kind of everyday workloads on the cloud. We'll put our systems, kind of like our systems and critical, on a standalone server that we own, we control. That owning and controlling, I think that's where you're starting to see a little bit more of a move to, instead of it being in my basement where, I can probably not, on a scalable basis, probably not provide as much security as a data center, maybe move that into a data center and keep the rest on the cloud. So I think, that's probably how to think about it and what kind of restrictions you want around securing your data. And I'll argue, in a data center, I can't even access some of the.
What's important is to know what data you have as well.
It's important to know what data
I think
you have.
some clients don't know that, and I think that's the process that we need to first start.
Yeah.
Know what data you want, make sure you know where it is, and then start the process going forward.
Absolutely.
Just as we end off the challenge.
And how is it going to grow?
Yeah, absolutely.
The
Yeah, the maturity of it, because
maturity of it as
if
well.
you look at the data growing, it's growing exponentially.
Yep.
And you don't know the size of the company grows versus some scenario. Just on a last challenge, I know this covered for a few, but on Daniel, if you can talk about the over-engineered data to keep up, using overcomplicated analytic tools to solve simple problems. Just a comment of simple data problems, but overcomplicating that.
Yeah, I think I think this comes down to culture view and a maturity level within. I'll speak about it from an analytic of the analytics within the organization, because what you actually find is the inverse, right? So the over-engineering happens with young, very immature organizations that aren't sure how to use the data to their best capabilities, and people coming out, and this is something that we're seeing touches on skills, right? Is that we're requiring people to have very high levels of academia coming into analytics within businesses, which is not exactly what you want from a business perspective, because you want the simplest solution that gives you the most value. That's could easily get you 80% of the way with 20% of the time. And I think there needs to be that kind of differentiator between what is, from an analytics perspective, what you learn in academia, and what actually makes sense from a business perspective.
Just to maybe add to that, I think I've seen something, well, it's been going on for a few years. There's sort of this pressure that every company needs to use AI or machine learning. And, they're saying, if you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. Now companies have someone who's a specialist in machine learning or AI. Now they need applications for that. And oftentimes I've seen that it doesn't really make sense to apply that to certain problems. Obviously, some companies need it.
Sure.
And it's a game changer for some. But, you sort of need that balance. Do you need a complex solution or not?
I think, Franco, it comes to a situation, Kellen, you can jump in now.
Yeah.
What's the business case? What's the use case for it? We all want to be connected and be in the AI and use machine learning to be quite close and connected, but is there a business case? And how does that business case impact to the company of achieving, kind of your point is revenue, making money? What is it? Are we improving customer service, profitability? Are we improving efficiency? What is the objective? And I think it's always point to link to that, so that we know we're linking into the business operational business strategy, and obviously from a profitability perspective. But I think as we're going to the next question. Sorry, Colin, you go for it.
I just want to make one interesting point there, Daniel. Brilliant point there. Stop treating machine learning specialists like machines. Number one, they are also human beings. We are human beings with thoughts and ideas, and we want to wake up and we want to do projects that are interesting, that are inspiring, that make us want to change the world. These are people who are incredibly intelligent, with a lot of power and a lot of talent. Don't let them sit and do one housing model for 2 years, guys. No, we are bored. People are bored stiff. Do not do that. Get people inspired, give them the platform, give them the space. Humans, and specifically very intelligent humans, machine learning specialists, AI guys, let them come up. Let them be creative with that data space. Let them understand the business. Don't put them in the corner in the basement. Bring them as parts of the business and help them understand the business so that they can actually be part and engineer some of those solutions.
That's a very important point. Before we get into where we're going, the CISOs last night, what they want is they want more collaboration to work with business, and that's what they want. If you understand the role of a CISO from a security perspective, also data analyst similar, is how do you collaborate? How do you understand the narrative and stories of what you're trying to create? And I think that's very important. So just the essence of time, I think we were running out of time, but just to close, before we close, just a question on where we're heading around data. And I think the area of data science is quite exciting. I think with the data that's increasing on a daily basis, and we being in a connected world, the area of data science is really going to take off in the next few years. And I think Gartner and IDC has related this area being one of the key areas where companies are looking to invest skills. So maybe let's just start quickly on that before we conclude. Michelle, maybe if you can give us a view of what is the thinking around on the banking side around the area of data science. What is it that you're doing in order to improve, linking to your comment around customer experience and how you actually just putting it together?
So it really is to try and use it to understand who our customer is, how they transact with us, what they're doing with us, and what the demographics are, how we segment them, so that we can target them appropriately and nudge them in the right direction. I think data has become the lifeblood of any financial institution and should be the lifeblood of any organization. We're also driving towards more data-driven culture, where we're putting the data in the hands of our business community. And I think that's a big shift for us in terms of where we came from a data perspective to where we're going to now. So how do we democratize this data, build this data culture, and make the data more literate in terms of how to read, understand, talk to, and work with data, essentially. I think data is also shifting into these more composable parts. Traditionally, we had these very central canonical data warehouses that we built, and it was really hard to kind of scale and as well as drive agility around meeting our client needs and our business needs. So it's how do we make this more composable? How do we build these data products more effectively and govern it appropriately going forward? And I think that's kind of where we're heading from a data perspective.
Great. I think it's important, Daniel, you come in now, especially you guys leading that space a bit. But I think what we're seeing now is, on our side as well, consolidating out the data architecture and looking at capabilities, especially around data lake. And how does a data lake, how do we get our data in one place? And how do we provide reporting in a single view of information? I think that's something that everybody's battling with. How do we get unstructured data? How do we get structured data in one place so that we have a single version of the truth? And I think that's the end of the day that business wants. They want to know that the data is transparent, it's efficient, it's real time, it's coming from a trusted source so that they can report and making decisions. So Daniel, just on your side, I know you're working on some of the exciting tools as well in that space. Just give us a view of how you see it, what tools are you using, and what do you think are the biggest elements that I think the audience has to take in mind in terms of, creating that capability in that space.
So I'll address the tools first. And I think, if you look online, right, to any of the data science tooling, you're going to come across the same things over and over and over again. Right? Python is going to be king for a while. You'll hear Julia come up every now and then. You'll hear Go come up every now and then. But Python's kind of the core skill that people are coming up with in terms of data science and AI. In terms of the actual skills required from an artificial intelligence point of view, artificial intelligence is built by data scientists largely. And if you go back 5 years, data scientists were considered these unicorns that could do everything, right? And now what we're seeing is that people have realized that one person doing everything is a really bad idea, to Kellen's point. And you're now seeing the rise of this machine learning engineer role, which is kind of like the last end of the data science, getting that solution into a production environment. And now I expect in the future what we're going to see, and this is speaking to capabilities, is the data science role isn't going to exist solely as a role. It's more going to be a data science capability that makes up different roles: data engineers, machine learning engineers, DevOps, MLOps, and so on. So I think that's what we're going to see moving forward. And there's a big change that needs to happen from an education perspective. Within Africa in general, we in South Africa are quite privileged because our data science maturity levels and education levels are actually quite high compared to the rest of Africa. So I think that's definitely looking into the future where we're going.
Excellent. Helen, if you want to comment, and then we can do closing thoughts just before we end.
Maybe this can be my closing
Sure.
thought. Very interesting is that I've noticed with the different generations. One generation asks how, my millennial generation normally asks why, and Gen Z is already doing it some way. And I love Gen Z because they already doing it. They do a lot of trial and error and figure it out. So while we are trying to predict what they're going to do and all of that, they've already done it, And so we need to look at them and start, instead of looking at historically what they've done, or because obviously these are babies, we don't know them yet. We can look and track and understand their behavior. We know, for example, Gen Z is more open about mental health, LGBTQ community, being a plant dad and a dog mom instead of necessarily having children. These have real economic consequences for businesses. If you are Toys R Us, you really need to become a Pets R Us within the next generation.
Absolutely.
And those are what my company or a lot of us are trying to say is that data science is no longer just a scientific methodology. It is a core business component for a modern business. And if you are not a modern business, it's your thing, bruv. You will suffer the consequences.
It's shifting business models.
Exactly.
That's what it's doing, right?
Exactly.
I think that's what you're just alluding to. Now, just final comments before we conclude, perhaps, on your side?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it has been said already, and that I think really what all of this is leading to is that there is going to be a lot of data being created. This we know, and I think as that happens, I think more and more emphasis is around how do we actually locate it, store it, secure it. Those things become more and more important.
Absolutely.
Who gets access to the data? There's a lot of discussions about the use of blockchain technologies around, who can actually access my data and who do I give permission? Do I have, is all my healthcare information on a blockchain and I can choose which doctor access it when I want to and where is that stored? So a lot of those questions I think come to the fore, and I think, as sort of the back end where we try and enable this, we need to come up with more and more products around addressing some of these issues.
Even the crypto exchanges, you got information on there. Don't know where it's stored.
Yep.
People are using it, but we don't know how else is being
Used.
stored. So just
Exactly.
a thought, but yeah, Franco, just last thoughts in terms of
Yeah, I mean,
Input.
I think maybe just a quickly touch on something Daniel said around the talent in SA.
Yeah.
I mean, I studied in the US and I taught a few classes there as well as in South Africa. The talent we have here is, it's on par, if not better,
Absolutely.
as data scientists in the US. So I think that's very exciting for SA.
totally agree.
I think in closing, just one thing that I think is quite important within an organization is to get buy-in for your data strategy. If everyone's not bought into, let's say, for example, real-time analytics, as opposed to once every day or once every week, then that strategy, even though it sounds fancy, it might not be the optimal strategy for your business. So I think buy-in, getting company buy-in is quite a big one.
Great. Daniel, I think your CISO last night, he said something quite interesting to what Franco is saying. He said that there are skills leaving the country, and especially in the security space. But what was he made a valid point. He said, let's encourage those that wants to go away, but let's build what we got in South Africa. And there's a lot of investment happening. And he's been overseas, he's been back, and he's saying it's not always greener that side. But he's saying let's encourage whoever wants to go, but then we build our own capability at home, and then we invest in individual skills. And that was very, very strong. I think everybody, kind of applauded him for that, the type of approach. So just on final thought on your side, Dan.
Yeah, from a skills perspective, I think we're really, really doing a great job in South Africa. And I think looking to the future, and this is, so I'm just going to speak from my experience, is that a lot of organizations are looking for the best of the best, right? The people that have access. And I think in the data space specifically, the people that are going to surprise you are the people that are a little bit later in their lives because they didn't have access to things like a computer to be able to work on. So you really need to take a chance on people, and they really will surprise you. I mean, from my experience, we've brought on 3 grads that have they're amazing. And, I think we just need to do more of that. Trust in the younger generation.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Daniel. It's about how you grow, retain, identify, and attract talent. And it's going to be hugely important in our space going forward with the war on talent. But also from a data strategy point of view, I think you need to look at it holistically. There's a lot of elements and components that come together when you put together a data strategy. Don't focus on just implementing the technology pieces. You need to bring in the culture pieces and look at it really holistically and bring your business closer and partner with them on the journey. I think those are my closing thoughts.
Thank you, Michelle. I think just to conclude from the panel, I think the most important is to understand your data. With that and bringing everything together with collaboration. I think that's very, very important, is to understand your data and understand what the meaning and the value of the data. We haven't even gone into that conversation. I wanted to actually ask the panel the view of value of data and cost of data, but obviously with time constraints, we can't get into that conversation. But I'd like to thank the panel for their valuable input. There's questions. Maybe let's open up for a few minutes if we do have time for questions, perhaps.
We've got 10 minutes. We're good.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. So we've had discussions around kind of the data management, privacy, security components. I'm quite interested in the modeling part, specifically the changing regulatory landscape as it relates to ethical, responsible AI adoption or modeling. There's been different ranges of regulations in Colorado and the US. We're seeing them restrict the use of consumer data in modeling. We're seeing things around guidance on random forest models. On a more abstracted level, we're seeing Microsoft release kind of their AI standard and the new ISO sort of regulation that was released on the governance of AI within organizations. So with that, from a South African perspective, there are no standards, right? There are no regulations currently outside of what we already have for things like Electric Communications Act, etc. What strategy are you adopting within your respective organizations? Want to keep track of the changing regulatory landscape, but secondly, and probably more importantly, to make sure that you're considering the issues that relate to data and algorithmic bias within the modeling of your various analytical models and algorithms. And then I've got a second question, if I may. You may choose to not answer this one. Just on the efficiency then of the process, are you finding use in things like synthetic data, in things like automated machine learning platforms, and I suppose in the future augmented analytics platforms as well? Thank you.
I think Daniel's in a position to answer that. Anybody can jump in, but you can, if you want to.
Should
I go? So the one, it's so how many people here have done Poppy training? Who remembers anything from those Poppy training videos? So that's the reality, is that knowledge is knowledge, but without it being applied, where's the benefit?
Yeah.
And so how do we make it extremely practical? Don't use people's ID numbers in a machine learning model. In specific machine learning models, don't use location. In specific machine learning models, don't use people's ages if you want to be biased. So your question is, there is no blanket statement. It's literally, and this is also why I have a business, thank God, because we can literally apply it to every single problem. Every single business is essentially solving a problem. Every business has a unique value proposition. And so essentially, within that business, there are going to be a multitude of problems that need very specific machine learning solutions. And it goes back to what Daniel said about specialization. We need to start employing, we need specific careers that go down towards only focusing on regulation in data. We need specific careers that do all of these things and bring this entire beautiful pie together. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, so maybe to address the kind of like regulatory, or at least making sure that we're putting together responsible and fair AI. I can't really speak for the rest of the organizations in South Africa, but I can speak for what we're doing at ABSA. And our intention here is to share, right? So I'm responsible for the responsible AI initiatives within ABSA. So we're putting together a set of standards and documents that people should comply with, and it's like a risk-based approach, right? A campaign selects people that we should sell a transactional account to, is very different to credit scoring. And how do we kind of govern these things separately and make sure that the controls in place for each one are up to scratch? And we're quite lucky in that we sponsor the chair for data science at the University of Pretoria, so we have access to academia. We have access to the philosophy department there, and they've actually got the head of philosophy at the University of Pretoria is also the chair for AI ethics, I believe. So we're kind of trying to work with them to kind of put something together that we can use and share for data science, responsible AI within financial services. So I'll say watch the space, but it's something that we're looking into.
Okay, any other questions, perhaps?
How's it?
Yeah.
So just to add to what Michelle had said earlier, you've got your, from an AI perspective, you've got a data strategy and you need to bring in all these culture components. But I think a very important component to add to that is you don't just enable your business, you need to enable your data team, right? So just building on that, we know that putting AI into production is very challenging. I think the failure rate is something like 80%. So Michelle, Daniel, Callan, or whoever, just tell me from your perspective, you guys are the ones getting your hands dirty with AI. What do you think is the leading factor into that high failure rates, and how do you think you can solve for that? Because that is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
People are trash.
Your words, not mine. Eh?
People, and like you're saying with the legislation, we couldn't go on. Everything was ready for the project, but the government. Let me not get assassinated here. But there were certain policies and procedures that needed to that were essentially holding back the process. That was one case. Then there's another case of egos being too big in the room. I want to use the biggest, fanciest, shiniest model because I want to use the biggest, shiniest, fanciest model, and I want to sound smart more than being smart. I want to, look like I'm doing the most with data instead of making money. You're a business. Your whole core objective is to make money. You're using data as a tool to do that. And so when it becomes less about, when it becomes simple and you actually go back to the root cause of why you're doing it, like I said, every single one of us in the room need to wake up and say, I'm getting up to do this specific thing. I'm excited to get up and build this machine learning model. I'm excited. And when people lose faith in the model, lose faith in what they're doing, that's essentially what happens. So I'll give you a practical example. I worked on a fraud model, and we had people who found this fraud for years and years and years. They knew all the ways. They knew all the ways these people were, all the funny tricks. It was so interesting. And we sat with them for months and months and months, literally just understanding all the tips and tricks. I think, sir, yesterday you mentioned complicit AI, about how multiple problems need multiple machine learning methods and all of those things. So we identified, okay, so is that a problem? That's a problem. That's a problem. How are we going to solve this one? We're going to solve this one. We're going to solve this one. All very different, but essentially all fraud, right? And not saying we need one fraud model. There's multiple problems in there, and some parts of it went into production, other parts it didn't go into production. The parts that went into production were the parts where people had invested in it, had bought into the concept, didn't believe that this AI was going to take their job, wanted to work with the machine learning, wanted to work with and create policies so that we actually adopt the results from the machine learning model as part. We look at this dashboards because, how many times, for all the analysts in the room, how many times have you built a dashboard that nobody looks at? It's painful. It's so mean. Like, don't do that. Don't ask someone to build a dashboard that you're never going to look at. It's very mean. It's not very nice to do. And so those kind of conversations need to start happening. It's like, come on, guys, let's get it together. Build stuff that you're actually going to use. Build stuff that's actually useful and practical. And get the people to communicate. It's people at the end of the day.
I was just going to, what's the failure rate you mentioned there?
80.
80%. Okay, that's quite concerning. Yeah, because in theory, if you've got experience and you know what data you're feeding into the model, what type of model or problem you're modeling, there should be a higher than 20% chance of it exceeding.
So I've got a lot of experience, at least in this world, because I've seen the change that has happened at ABSA in terms of this. So we went from a world 4 years ago where we had a success rate of about 10%, right? And we had a much larger team back then. Whereas now we've got a success rate of about 83%. So 83% of the models that we build make their way into production. And there were a couple of things that changed. One was we weren't just doing data science for the sake of it. We were getting commitment. We were getting buy-in. Right? That's one of the big things. The other thing is addressing the gaps along the way. So we're really good at the moment as a data science community in general at doing the modeling work. And that's not enough, right? Because then you've got somebody clicking run every month, right? Or every day. And that's like not the place to go. So bringing people together across that journey, as I mentioned, data engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, and then also the context with which you find yourself in, right? Don't go looking for best practice tools. Those aren't the ones that are going to give you the thing that's going to get you over the line. The thing that's going to get you over the line are the tools that you can bring in that you already have to move things across the line. And the successes that we've had, we've found that, you know, we're really good at the beginning stage stuff. We're really bad at getting it over the line. So what did we do? We built. We were lucky enough to have really strong technical skills. So in areas where so for example, like a really good example is we couldn't get our data from where the model was outputting it onto our strategic platforms. There's a big gap there. There's a really big gap there in general within the coding, like the actual technical implementation side. So we built it. But not only did we build it, we open sourced it. So now anyone can access it. ABSA open source software on GitHub.
Nice.
Just to add, I think visibility of the data as well. So if you have an ERD, you know exactly which points you want to use and which use cases. That also helps a lot in terms of identifying the levels of automation where you want to automate. You know, I think we know we got the data, but we don't actually visualize the data. We don't put it into a relationship diagram. Look at your entities here, our data coming in. Where can we use the use cases? For example, bots. Where can we use it to speed efficiency in the call center so that it can limit the capability on the call center calls coming in? So those are the use cases. I think that helps a little bit going forward as well. I think in a matter of time, we got 2 more questions, maybe. We can 2. Yeah, perfect.
Great. Thanks. So thanks, guys, for great discussions. You spoke quite a bit about data strategy. So I'm just wondering, in your experience, what has worked well? Enterprise-wide data strategy or cluster or departmental data strategy? And also, how do you rein in the enterprise architecture roadmap with that strategy? Thanks.
Anybody want to take that? Michelle.
I'm a second. So I think so the architecture, in terms of how you're going to drive your strategy, whether it's a central architecture or distributed architecture, will kind of inform how you build this ecosystem at an enterprise level. I can speak from an Investec point of view. We've come from a very traditional kind of build around central architectures, and we're shifting our thinking to more distributed data mesh, which is really about building these data products and pushing the data ownership back to the domain where it belongs, or where that data is sourced from, to create these pieces of information that other people can use and consume quite easily. It's really around how you then make this data interoperable across the organization and look at it not only from an organizational level, but also from the business unit level in terms of how they use that data. It's not easy to do. Okay. So it's bringing all those components together. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Question in front as well.
Yeah. Mine is, so earlier, the gentleman in the middle did mention something to the effect of tools, but I didn't get your response around tools. But just picking on an article I read here regarding FNB and in the pursuit for 200 vacancies for data analysts. And in this article, this was an April article, they're referring to them struggling to find individuals or candidates with appropriate skill sets. in this space. I'm not sure if they found them. This was in April. And the article further speaks to technology that digital banks are using to be able to drive behavioral banking trends, right? My question then is, what firstly are this issue of skill sets? What kind of skill sets are they talking about here that we should be looking at? Secondly, what is the differentiation between digital banks and traditional banks? Where are they getting it right when it comes to data analytics? Thanks. And what kind of tools, perhaps, do they have in their advantage that traditional banks are looking for? Thank you.
So an easy, a practical way of answering is, once upon a time, we used to have a typist, right? There was a specific job for people who could type. Now we all type, and we type on different platforms. And so the demand for certain skills makes us essentially supply that skill at a certain level. So now we have a data scientist. But later down the line, like Daniel said, it's going to develop into multiple careers. So think about that data scientist role more as the for like a typist role. We used to have typist as a career, you know. Now it's just a skill. So all of us are going to be data scientists. All of us are potentially already data scientists, making use of machine learning models, making use of data to make decisions. It's just about centralizing that and putting it at the forefront of everything that we do and understanding it a little bit better.
Okay, thanks for that. One more question. I think we're running
Sorry,
out of time.
do you want me to maybe address the issue around the 200 skills that are currently missing? I think I can address that directly. And it's largely because, I hate to be that guy, but there's a really big gap between research and what's taught in academia and what we're expected to know in the real world. So from an analytics perspective, Python is really kind of like gold standard. But even if you want to go to an entry-level data analyst position, people are expected to know how to use tools like Power BI, things like Tableau. These aren't taught in universities or even in some of the other like diplomas. And because it's not taught and it's a requirement, there is that skills gap, right? Which is why I said take the chance. You have to give people the opportunity to learn these things. And I'll go back to it. Yes, Python is a tool that everyone is using, but in South Africa, in universities, everybody's taught SAS or MATLAB, which are archaic. Right? And so there needs to be a really big shift in terms of what people learn, and it's not going to happen now. It's going to take time. So right now, if I was FNB, take the chance on people that are smart, that may not have the skills and are willing to learn.
Question?
Only if time allows between lunch, I might add food for thought on the menu for that. So my question is more from the perspective of my belief is the most two important attributes of data is timeliness and accuracy for it to be consumed in the right way. And I come from the compliance background, and we go by a cliche in the organizations that compliance is not just the responsibility of anti-money laundering and compliance department, but it has to be a culture instilled all across, even to the front enders. Now, data trickles into the organization from the platforms where the customer interacts or the front-ender staff. So what would the authorities, the governments, the think tanks do to instill a culture in the organizations that data's integrity and timeliness is not just the responsibility of audit and all of that, but everyone else? And just to give you an example, I flew in from the Middle East to attend this conference, and we landed on the airport. And the gentleman over there in the queue was asking about the health declaration form. And I was very encouraged that they have certain checks and balances. And I went ahead and told him that I've not filled it. Should I fill it? He's like, yeah, go back. Fill it and come back. And I was very encouraged that he's doing his job very well. And then on that form, I could have written swear words and lyrics of some song and could have given it. And I could have just walked through. I actually was very illegible in my handwriting, and I would wish the person best of the luck if someone is trying to read that handwriting. So my question would be, now this information and this data should be sensitive. I am jeopardizing the health of all who travel around me at that time. But the idea of collecting that data just to collect it and do nothing about it does not mean anything. So what would the governments and the policymakers do to ensure that data's integrity and timeliness is taken seriously?
I think if I can answer, it's more about the value of the data. And I think it requires ownership of that. And I think that's the most important to understand what the value is going to bring. And it's not about collecting data, but where can the data be used meaningfully? And that boils down to the point that I had previously. You need to understand where your data and what data you're collecting and why you're collecting the data. And I think in all organizations it's very different. In our organization, reporting data is critical. Making sure we have the right data, coordinate projects from water, human settlements, schools, making sure that we get the right data so we can prioritize accordingly in terms of what projects in South Africa is going to make the biggest difference to the economy and fundamentally impact to social impact. So those are the two key things, and that's what we're driving, to ensure that we're making sure we're looking at the finance for those projects and what are aspects that we need to look at. So I think it boils down to that. Understanding your data, when you need it and how you need it, and when you need to use it from changing data into information and value is a process that needs to happen. And I think in all organizations, they don't do that. They take the data, collect it for certain reasons. I'm not saying all organizations do that. There are some organizations that will do that. But it's the proactive organization that takes that and meaningful and has a person that's in charge of data. And if you have a person that's not in charge, so obviously, you have roles of chief information officer. So obviously that role is to understand what do you do with information, how do you meaningfully put it through. So I think it matures in different organizations, but I think it boils down to ownership. How do you change that into value, and how do you provide meaningful data to the stakeholders so they can make the right decisions?
I think there'd probably be an element of actually how you collect that data as well, right? So how do you make it as easy as possible to get the data that you actually want?
Absolutely.
You have a drop down instead of ask somebody to type who might have a typo in the data you're collecting, for example.
Okay, I think we run out of time, everyone. Thank you so much. It's an awesome debate, and I think this could be a topic that we could go till quite a long time, but limited time. We've tried to identify the key points, but thank you to the panel. Thank you so much. It's been an awesome discussion going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much to our panel.
That way.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is now that time of the day. It is lunchtime. So as yesterday, for those of you who weren't here yesterday, lunch is served straight out that door to the right at the restaurant. Please let us be back at 2:00 for our next speaker. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. In preparation for events and conferences such as this, I do as much research as possible on the speakers to ensure that I best represent them before they get onto the platform. Our next speaker with 5 degrees has got more titles than a heavyweight boxer. So please enjoy your lunch and be back at 2:00. See you then. Enjoy.
Make I face my flaws. Make a budget, no use me testosterone. Make butter, no stain my clothes. On my advantage every time I ball. Cause now only the way they set my cause. They my holding as I run my run. Me I know they for the attack.